Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Lost in the Wasteland, my weekly show where I get to learn a little bit more about somebody else's perspective on movies. And this week, I have a very special guest, filmmaker Soraya Simi. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Shane. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And getting a chance, which is awesome to talk to you about your film, Row of Life. But before we dive into that, if you just want to introduce yourself a little bit, maybe some of your experience as a filmmaker, and then we could talk about your film.
Absolutely. So, I'm the director of a feature documentary called Row of Life. It's actually my first feature film straight out of film school, quite literally straight out of film school. And I've been working in the film industry for about 10 years now, doing mostly documentary work, commercial work as well. And as of late, I am dipping my toes in scripted. So excited to continue to evolve as a storyteller and challenge myself as a filmmaker.
Awesome. And this is exciting, getting to have your first feature coming out, I'm sure. Um, and getting a chance to talk about this film, which this focuses on the story of Angela Madsen. And I guess my first big question is like, what inspired you to tell this story about Angela?
Sure. So when I was a senior in film school, I went to USC. That was the year that a documentary called Free Solo won Best Picture,
Yeah.
Best Documentary. And I had already kind of situated myself in that niche of outdoor adventure storytelling well before that happened. So I kind of saw this coming for a while, that the quality of storytelling that was happening in the outdoor sports world was just so exceeding anything else I was watching. So that niche stood out to me for two reasons. I thought it was just absolutely fascinating, fundamentally to follow extreme athletes. And then selfishly, I thought the lifestyle you got to have as
Mhm.
a filmmaker, traveling to all these cool places and
Mhm.
everything seemed pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so when I was my junior year, I took a leave of absence to do a program where I lived on a sailboat for 3 months. And that for me was a chance at really trying my hand at not doing, proper kind of USC studio films, but like a documentary, like white knuckle, bare bone, tough
Mhm.
environment. And I produced a 20-minute film from that. I don't think it's anything great, but I finished it. And that film wound up touring sailing clubs on the East Coast and the West Coast. And lo and behold, Angela Madsen went to one of those screenings in Long Beach. And I didn't know who Angela was at the time. I was a month, maybe two, graduated at this point. And I get a message on Facebook from her, and it says quite plainly, I saw your film at the Long Beach Sailing Club. I'm going to row the ocean alone. Do you want to make a little video about it? Exact words. Amazing. And it was a very weird kind of, unexpected message. And I Googled her and very quickly learned that she was this absolutely extraordinary athlete,
Yeah.
multi-Paralympian, a Guinness World Record holder. I mean, just like, who the heck is this person contacting me? I don't have any,
Yeah.
stripes yet, essentially. And so what inspired me to tell it, I really felt pulled to this genre to begin with. And Angela herself was so interesting to me. Here I was watching a lot of these kinds of documentaries where it was just typically like a white dude doing something
Mhm.
cool because he could, and
Yeah.
me, when I met Angela, instantly the fact that she is 60 years old, the fact that she's paralyzed from the waist down, the fact that she's a little overweight, the fact that she's gay and has nothing to hide about that. Everything about her was different than what I was seeing anywhere else. And it felt like an opportunity to put someone on screen that I don't get to see otherwise. So it felt really special.
That's awesome. And that's such a great story about the even just the power of putting yourself out there and
Totally.
never knowing like what kind of connection can come back with that and having her reach out to you. That's a incredible honor. For sure, like being able to have that connection. And to your point, this is a film about somebody who like I watch a lot of documentaries, and me personally, I much rather live vicariously through these films than do some of the things. Like you brought up Free Solo. I'm incredibly afraid of heights and would
Yeah.
never do any of those kinds of things myself. But being able to tell a story about somebody who's such a different
Mm,
protagonist
mm,
subject than a lot of films like this. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And I guess, Soraya, if you think about Angela, what was like the biggest thing that you were trying to make sure you got across about
mm.
her and her experience with this film?
Thank you for that question. I was really hoping to convey that her personality was really unexpected to me. When
Mm,
I met her, well, I thought when I Googled her and got the first impression, here's this really serious, tough as nails, badass, like Marine veteran, whoo,
yeah.
whoo, this is gonna be someone who like I'm gonna have to be really careful and walk on eggshells around because she's a tough, tough woman. And then I met her and she was like the silliest, goofiest, cuddliest teddy bear of a human that I have ever known, not an
Mm,
exaggeration. And it was so antithetical to what I thought someone like that would be. And for me, such a testament to who she became in spite of what life handed her. As you learn in the film, she's been through innumerable adverse moments and had to really find something deep through that, like purposeful to live for. And I just think to be someone who can go through all of that and then still rise with a sense of humor and a joy and just like a general happy disposition, that for me was really remarkable. And this film, I won't go into too much detail of the twists and everything, but there's this twist, and um, it took a really hard left turn and we had to really decide tonally what was appropriate
mm,
afterwards. And it was very important to me that it retained that brightness in it still.
yes.
It couldn't be a sad film. It had to really carry that like light that she had.
Well, and I appreciate it. And having watched the film, you can definitely feel that spirit throughout it.
That's
And
awesome.
in terms of trying to convey that. And I think that's such an important thing, especially in a documentary where you have a specific subject, is matching that
Mhm.
subject. And in terms of this film, I know you mentioned like something like Free Solo and stuff like that. I always like to ask filmmakers because, I think the vast majority of filmmakers, love film and have been
Mhm.
influenced by this. Are there any particular, like, say, documentaries that really stood out to you that kind of helped point you in a direction in terms of how you wanted to go about creating this story?
Definitely. I watched my editor and I always want to pull him in and credit him because he and I
Mhm.
are best friends from film school and will
Yeah.
have my back and be my partner in crime forever. We probably watched The Alpinist maybe a dozen to somewhere between 12 and 20
Mm.
times, not just all over and over again, a story
Yes.
about a climber called Marc Andre who has
Mm.
this extraordinary destiny and just knows it about himself. And we found that film was able to accomplish a really tough transition in what was inevitable, or in the story, just as a
Yes.
twist that happened. So we referenced that a lot. We watched, I mean, any documentary that's come out about women's sports in the last 10
Mm.
years, I've probably watched. There was a great one made in of the first women who sailed around the
Yes.
world, the Golden Globe. Oh my gosh, extraordinary. And there were many times, Deepest Breath, I could keep going. I mean, you name it, I've watched it.
Yeah.
And many times in the making of this film, it took me 6 years where I would watch one of these documentaries and be so intimidated by how much better of a production it was and how much more sophisticated the narrative was coming across. And it's so funny how much time it really took to feel like Row of Life was elevating itself on that journey to really meet that level of storytelling. I hope we've accomplished it today. I'm really proud of where it is, but it was you when you're a student in film school, you have really good taste, hopefully, or
Yeah.
you're nurturing good taste, but then you look at your work, you're like, oh. So it took just time and like consistently going back to these same films over and over again and deconstructing them and doing the three-act structure and problem solving. Like, how did they do it? It's all in there. You don't need to know the filmmakers, you don't need the editor, you just need to go to the film. It's all in there.
Well, and there's a lot of great points there. First off, appreciating shouting out your editor. And I think something that I've learned a lot more from all the years that I've been reviewing film is like how important editing can be and how like unless the film is specifically trying to be attention grabbing with its editing, it's kind of like the thankless job of like you have all of this footage. And I could only imagine, especially with like a documentary, you're trying to figure out like how you're going to get this film down to 82 minutes and like figuring out how that all comes together. But also some of the films that you brought up, there's a theater about 15 minutes north of the university that I went to and work at. And it's called Montgomery Cinemas. And it's changed a lot since COVID. And I think the big thing is like they have bigger films now because, like, you need to draw more people in after COVID. But before that, it's six screens, and they would show random documentaries,
Mhm.
independent films, foreign films, and one of them was I remember distinctly seeing Maiden at that documentary at
Oh,
that theater,
so
and
good.
that was a really powerful film.
Nice.
And I can definitely see where there's some of that connection here in terms of trying to tell that story. But no,
Thank you.
eh, oh, go ahead.
Well, actually, one thing I will add to that is because as we're talking, I'm thinking through all these other ones I watched, and I won't call anyone out too hard on this, but so many documentaries that were unjustifiably long, you know, and realizing, oh my gosh, this would have been so much stronger if they cut the fat here, got just you are always learning. Every single time you watch something, there is an opportunity to learn what has been done well and what can be done better. And I think that was something Joseph, my editor, and I were observing over and over again is there was this pattern, and I don't know why. Is it the phenomenon of binging series or what? But documentaries going into 2.5 hours and what you're keeping isn't so essential to the thesis, even though it's always hard to kill your babies. And so that was part of the education as well, as let's not fall into the trap of because we're in love with how we cut this scene, it has to stay in there. So keeping it to 82 minutes was really important, 80-ish.
Yeah.
We wanted it to be tight. We wanted it to you start and you finish it. And I've now seen the film, I mean, probably over 500 times, and I can
Yeah.
still watch it all the way through, and it's not this big mission every time. And for me, that was important as well.
Well, and it's that's a very interesting point, especially because I know we were discussing before we started recording about expectations going
Yes.
into a film,
Yes.
and not gonna lie, when I go to watch a documentary and it's 2 hours, 2 hours plus, I'm like,
Yep.
this better have like so much in it that it just because like most documentaries are not that. You expect a
Yeah.
lot of the float in between the 80 to 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And you brought up a very important point of like is this important to the thesis? And that I think that's so important, especially to documentaries, because like this is like a visual essay of like what you're trying to talk about and try
Absolutely.
to put a spotlight on. And just a side comment, I know you mentioned, like trying to make sure like this film's gonna be up to that kind of standard. And I can imagine, wanting to make sure that this incredible woman that you made this documentary about does justice. And I
Mm,
think especially watching this film, you can feel that. And you can
thank
feel
you.
that this was somebody that really was someone special in that film. And the film allows you to feel that throughout for sure. And especially even as the film gets to where it resolves itself in terms of, and like I did not know anything about Angela before watching this film, and honestly, it hits a lot
Mm,
harder if you don't, honestly. So go check out the film before you look up anything about her, if you don't know her story. But
thank
I
you.
guess
Sure.
my last question I always like to ask talking
Sure.
to a filmmaker is like, if you can give that like big one, what's that one reason why you should check out this film?
Mm, I think the idea of someone being inspirational has become trite. We hear
Mhm.
it a lot. It's a bit of a cliche, but I absolutely promise people who watch this that this is the one in a million exceptions of a story where hearing Angela's story is one of the most inspirational things you will walk away from. And I know because she affected my life so profoundly. And everybody who's watched this film now so far, it has been breathtaking to watch their reactions. I'm going to cry. It's stunning to see how it moves you. And I think this is such a story rooted in determination, in possibility, and overcoming despite the odds, and in what becomes really a love story ultimately between Angela and her partner, and this and what is on the balance, when you have a dream and when you love someone. And I think um yeah, this film touches so many profound things, but also just really simple things as well. And it's funny.
That's
Laugh.
yeah, absolutely. It it's an 80-minute film that you're in it. It
Mhm.
moves well, and you really do connect with her and the life around her. And you don't even need to go past the synopsis to realize like how inspirational this story is. When you think renowned ocean rower, Marine Corps veteran, three-time Paralympian, and 14-time Guinness World Record holder, it's like that's a resume.
Yes, no
And
kidding. Anything else?
when I was a business student, it's like they're gonna look at your resume for like 10 seconds and then move on. It's like that's an impressive 10-second read, and just being like that's a resume. So
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, Soraya, where can people expect to be able to check out Row of Life?
So right now we're on a film tour. We're
Mhm.
playing a number of amazing film festivals. I'm so excited to go to as many as possible. So regionally on our website, people can see where it's coming near you. We're in the midst of having discussions with buyers and distributors. So hopefully, fingers, toes, everything crossed, it will be on some kind of streaming platform soon. But yes, it's touring in both the US and Europe right now.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to include link to the website for people to take a look at. Hey, if you're able to go to one of those festivals and check out the film um, at a festival, I'm sure that's an absolutely wonderful experience. And me having watched this in my home, knowing like this was a really special experience. So, and Angela being such a special subject. So, obviously, keep an eye out for when the film comes around. But thank you so much for talking about your film with me. Now, are you ready for us to learn a little bit more about you as
Let's do
a
it.
film lover?
Yes, please.
So, shifting gears into everybody's favorite question, what's your favorite film?
My favorite film is Beasts of the Southern Wild by Ben Zeitlin.
It's a very beautiful film,
Hmm.
and it's especially one of those like little films that really wound up getting a lot of attention for like a film that you would not expect like
Yeah.
that too. But what are some of the things that like really makes that film stand out for you?
Well, I like you said, it's just the sweetheart Cinderella story of an independent film having its moment.
Yeah.
But the one I go back to every single time, I need to remember why I'm a filmmaker and a
Mhm.
storyteller. I don't know what that like intangible magic is that I feel when I watch it, but it just, instills in me such a love and passion for what I do, and why storytelling is this rich, beautiful thing with infinite possibilities. I think that film continues to surprise me as a magical realism story. And I always love films with any stories with young, powerful girls or women as the protagonists. I have a sweet spot for that.
And I think one of the hardest things to make work is magical realism because you're blurring that kind of line. And that's a special film that's able to, navigate that really well. And I distinctly remember when that film did come out and was getting
Mhm.
that kind of buzz. And you're just like, it seems so very different than so many of the other films that were getting like awards consideration. And you love to
Yeah,
see little films like that, like the little film that could.
right.
For sure.
Totally. And I don't know if this takes up too much time, but I hope this story is true, but I heard a behind the scenes story about that one where Ben Zeitlin, he made a short version of that when he was a film student at Wesleyan.
Mhm,
And his professors said, there's really something here. We
mhm.
really recommend you write a feature or try to get this made. And oh yeah, yeah, yeah. One day, I'll sit down and I'll write the script. And then he got hit by a car and was in a like a hospital bed for 9 months. And, I mean, that's horrible. I don't mean to laugh
Yeah.
at that. Had nothing else to do except write the script. And that's what I believe he developed it with Sundance. I'm a little bit shaky on those details now, but that story has always stuck with me as, man, when an idea has its time, like it will force you to sit down and generate it. You cannot avoid, stories are these really beautiful things, entities, consciousness that I feel like know when they need to come out. And if that story is true, I really, really like it.
Well, and I think that's such an interesting thing to think about in terms of having an idea and expressing your art and finding that like this is my moment. Like sometimes it's
Yeah,
something to an extreme like that,
sure.
or something changes in your life and you just realize like, you know what, it's time
Yeah,
and to get that down for sure. Now,
absolutely.
this is always a fun one. I always enjoy listening to, but what's your earliest memory of going to the movies?
I've been going to the movies since probably before I could walk, but I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and
Okay.
it's so hot there in the summers. And going to the movies was always the earliest I can remember is just going as an escape, 4 years
Mm.
old with friends, with my brother, with my mom, and just having that dark, cavernous, air-conditioned building with cold soda. And so for me, going to the movies has always been tied to escapism,
Mm.
and transportation.
Do you recall a particular film that really stood out to you?
You know, uh, Probably what's that one? Pan's Labyrinth was a big one when I
Okay.
was growing up, and I think that one stuck with me because it was so weird
Well,
for
and
like a
the film
6-year-old
that
person.
like they made sure to convince people that it was a fairy tale, and then you find out that
Yes.
it's an allegory on fascism, and you're just like, this is
Exactly.
not
Yeah,
for
that
children.
definitely went over my head the first time I watched it. But those, I think I was way too young watching Snakes on a Plane. And the reason that one sticks out to me is I lived in Tucson, and then everyone was paranoid afterwards that there would be a rattlesnake in the theater. And I think someone tried to pull a prank and put a fake one, and it was like that one, there's some kind of trauma tied there.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Oh,
I have to reflect more deeply on what the very first one was. But I mean, I would go multiple times a week. So
it is hard to not. It's hard to forget Snakes on a Plane because,
I
like, I
know.
just remember when that came out, and the line, "I'm sick of these mother effing snakes
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah, yeah.
a
So this
plane," and
Mother
you're just
Evan's
like,
playing. I need to
that
rewatch it.
became even before memes were a thing, really. Like
Iconic.
that
It needs to make
was.
a comeback. Yeah, it needs
But
to try.
so I've been to Arizona once. I actually got to go for work back in 2018 for a conference. Um,
Nice.
it was in Chandler, like so right outside of Phoenix,
Hmm.
and I got to go to a Harkins theater for the first
Oh,
time.
nice.
And I I am a loyal A-list member, but to be frank, AMC's in New Jersey and in like Philly and New York aren't exactly the theaters anymore. But I just remember going into that Harkins. It was right outside of a mall,
Hmm.
and they had like three
It's good.
people going down each end cleaning up everything. I'm like,
Yeah.
there's so many people staffed here.
It's like
Like,
going to a temple in Arizona. We take our movie theaters very seriously. It's definitely like your one option for
Mhm.
5 months out of the year
I'm
what you
trying to
can do.
remember I think it was The Public. It was that Emilio Estevez film that he directed about unhoused people living in a library and
Oh,
them trying to throw them out. That I happened to like I was there. I'm like, I'm gonna go
like,
see a movie. So and that happened to be one that I got to see. Also, side note, I'm a big Diamondbacks fan
oh,
randomly from New
nice. Oh, yeah.
Jersey. So that
Wow.
was that was a dream come true because they had their home opener when I was there for that conference, and I
That's
actually got to
amazing.
go to Chase Field and see a game there, which was very
Wow. That's so
exciting.
lucky. That sounds like it was a really good trip for you. I'm glad.
Yes. And it was
Very
a
special.
productive one too. So
Yeah.
yes. And also, so Harkins, if I ever could go back to another one, definitely would recommend. And
Mm,
they do not pay me, but I wouldn't mind if they did.
yeah, let's get a
Um,
sponsor
but
in here.
but a couple of questions around like favorites. Do you have a particular favorite genre of movies?
Yes, so my favorite genre is Westerns. for whatever reason, maybe it's because I grew up
because
in
you're
Arizona.
from Arizona.
I just, and I think that's what it is. It makes me extremely nostalgic for where I grew up.
Mm,
And I'm also so happy. I know I kind of dissed films that are too long earlier, but a
mhm.
Western can't be long enough. Horizon, part one, part two, part three, give them all to me. I'm like there for it. I really love Butch Cassidy and the Sundance
Mhm.
Kid, Dances with Wolves, Last of the Mohicans, even like any epic, like Lawrence of
Yeah.
Arabia. I love epics, and
Mhm.
is maybe a better answer. I can really, because for me, it's such a wonderful excuse to, again, back to the escapism and the transportation. I really like when I can have a rainy, cozy afternoon and just go somewhere else. It's pure magic every single time.
Well, and I have certainly seen some very long films in a theater. Honestly, mostly because of Martin Scorsese recently.
Mhm.
So
I
like
just watched The Departed on the plane. Yeah.
nice getting to see like Killers of the Flower Moon in a
Loved
theater for
it.
all 3.5 hours.
I loved it.
I personally was not bored at all with three and a
Me
half
neither.
hours.
And also, that was my first Alamo Draft House experience. So I could,
Oh,
you could have made that 8 hours. I was a happy camper.
there you go. I what's funny is I'm a huge fan of westerns as well, and actually so is my wife. And
Great.
that's something we bonded over. And she actually showed me like I didn't see a whole lot of like spaghetti westerns and Leone and stuff like that until like my wife showed me Once Upon a Time in the West.
Oh, nice.
And Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is one of my favorite
Of
films
course. Yeah.
because like you obviously have like the John Wayne, John Ford westerns, and I did an 80-week journey on my channel going through film by film through all of John Ford's
Oh my God.
filmography, and there's so many. Well, technically he had 140 films, but 60 of them are lost. That would have been forever, literal years journey, but really seeing so many of his films and what he was able to do for the Western genre in general. The Searchers is one of my favorite
Yeah, of
films as
course.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, by far, I think John Wayne's most interesting and dynamic performance because it's not
Totally.
just him being like John Wayne,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And it makes me so happy. Like, did I
Mm,
love Horizon? No, but I did love the experience of like, wow, I got to go see a Western in a theater because how often does that happen?
exactly.
And
And yeah. And there's going to be certain tropes, and there's just, it's like comfort
yeah.
food, I think. You're just
Mhm.
kind of, I agree. I agree. And I've heard part two's better, but I haven't seen part two yet. And I will just add one tiny, maybe it's a humble brag, but we premiered Row of Life at the Santa Barbara Film Festival.
Mhm.
And I got a text message late at night. I was already in my PJs in
Yeah.
bed. And they said, "Hey, I can get you into the Horizon 2 after party." And I was like,
Oh.
well, I have to go to that. So I got up, got dressed, walk in the room. Kevin Costner immediately the minute I walked through the door. And then Quentin Tarantino. And I was like, this is so cool. I didn't
Of
talk
course
to
he would
either.
be there.
Yeah.
That would make a lot
But
of
it
sense.
was a cool moment. And yeah, I look forward to seeing two. I think where he messed up, I wonder if he should have released it as a series and
Well,
if it would.
and to be honest, I think that's where it's going to wind up getting
Yes,
distributed at some
exactly.
point.
Yeah.
In my brain, well, I don't know what the relationship is at this moment,
Right.
but pre them wrapping up Yellowstone, I was just imagining like Taylor Sheridan swoops in and this turns into a 10-part like Paramount
Probably.
Plus series,
Yeah.
to be
They could.
honest.
I mean, Paramount Plus, it's the cash cow infinitely for them. Everything he does. So
They sure do love Taylor Sheridan at Paramount
sure do.
Plus. It's like my dad and my stepmom religiously watch every show that he comes out with, and they are not people that religiously sit there and stream
That's
shows.
funny.
So
I wonder what it is, the nerve that he has tapped into of
mhm,
it's a particularly American popularity. I don't see it translated so much
yeah,
elsewhere. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed Yellowstone. I didn't think it was the greatest show of all time. It's very cheesy and soap opera-y.
yeah.
But there's something, maybe it harkens back to the like junk food, comfort food.
Mhm,
People need to just click out of their brains for a second and they're very it's so hyperbolic
mhm.
in like unjustified ways very often.
Well,
I don't know, but
like
there's something he's really doing there.
I'm a pro wrestling fan, and like there's a reason I watch professional wrestling. It's soap opera for men, with action and everything, and like that's a soap
Exactly.
opera western. Like it really hits that kind of but I'm a huge fan of his films. Like
Yeah.
I know he didn't direct it, but he wrote Hell or High Water is one of my
I love
favorite
that movie.
films of the
Me too. I
past
love that
20
movie.
years. And I was so enthralled with Wind River to the
Me
point
too.
where
That's what I was thinking of. Oh, mwah,
I had
beautiful
to
film.
go to the bathroom
Yeah.
for the last 30 minutes of the movie, and I'm like, I'm not moving. And that I will never forget that movie experience. But
Yeah, he
um
does thriller really, really,
mhm,
really well. Yeah.
really well. Now, I know we've been talking about some filmmakers, but do you have a
Yeah.
particular favorite filmmaker?
No single filmmaker, and
Mhm.
it rotates a lot. And I'm extremely fortunate to have a boyfriend who's also a cinephile. He's an economist. I think you two have a lot in common. And we have a funny rhythm going where we like fixate on one filmmaker and then we'll
Okay.
just binge their work or one actor. And it's been really I love it. I love that I have a partner that I live with that wants to
Mm.
do that with me. So I'll just mention who's recently been on the
Okay.
docket. We've done Coen Brothers, Tarantino. I'm on a Catherine Bigelow kick because I want to work with her so badly.
Nice.
Aaron Sorkin is one of my filmmaker, storyteller, brain in a human body. I just love that man so much. And then I've always been a huge fan of Richard Linklater. I
Okay.
think he has such an interesting range. I mean,
Mm.
School of Rock to Before Sunset, like
Yeah.
to Boyhood. I mean, he's a funny guy and someone I would love to meet and have a beer with one day.
The Coens are mine and my wife's favorite
Number one,
filmmaker.
yeah, I mean, they're brilliant. Like it's
My wife's favorite film is their True Grit, which and
ah, very
which
cool.
it's very interesting watching like
Yeah,
the original John Wayne one feels very
yeah.
much like a John Wayne movie made in the 60s. And then the Coens are just like, and I've read the novella and it's
Oh man,
so like accurate
amazing.
to what that novella was. And Richard Linklater is so interesting. One of the films that I always recommend to people, even though it's very weird, is Bernie, because
Oh, I
I just
haven't seen that. Yeah,
it
yeah.
is it's a mockumentary
Uh-huh.
in terms of like, and Jack Black is playing
Yeah.
very not what you expect Jack Black to play. And also just watching Matthew McConaughey being this like boisterous
Love
prosecutor
that
who's just like
movie.
talking right at the camera, just like so much.
I'm gonna have
That's a
to add
really
that. That's
special.
gonna be a perfect one I watch this weekend. I have not seen Bernie. Good. Thank you for
There
that
you
rec.
go.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Thank
Now,
you.
thinking about in front of the camera, who are some of your favorite actors or actresses?
So I always struggle with these favorites questions because I love, I admire and love everybody. But the first
Yeah.
two names that came to mind, for both actress and actor, Frances McDormand. Oh my God. In
Yes.
line with our Coen brother crush here,
Yeah.
she is just unfreaking believable. If I could handpick anyone to play Angela in a scripted adaptation, it would be her. I think she would knock it out of the park. And I love her, and I also really love Brad Pitt. And Brad Pitt for me is like a symbol of any actor who I think defies their typecast as the gorgeous hero always. He does comedy exceptionally
Mhm.
well and
Yes.
drama exceptionally well. And I love both of those actors, Francis and Brad Pitt, can often do it in the same scene, in the same
Yep.
line. And I mean, I am blown away every single time I watch them. And I just watched Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, like a
Mm.
week or two ago, and rewatched it, and just I'm in awe. It's
Yeah.
so talented.
Marge Gunderson is one of honestly the best characters ever put into a movie. And
100%.
Fargo is Fargo is such like
It's
if
probably
you
my favorite.
describe it, it's such a hard sell and how to make that work. And I feel like it just magically crawled out of the Coen brothers combined brains that like I
Yes,
feel like nobody else could have made this movie
a hundred
and
percent.
make it work because it's
Yes.
so silly in
Right.
so
Is
many ways. But
that your accomplice in the wood chipper?
yeah, he's just so incredible and is so believable. Like I remember a film that really struck me in college watching was American I just blanked. No, Almost Famous.
Oh yeah,
Almost
yeah.
Famous. And even just her as the mom. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, she was so authentic and believable. I'm like,
Yeah.
this would totally be my mom if I went on this trip. Um, And then Brad Pitt, weird Brad Pitt is peak acting, whether it's
Yes.
like Jeffrey Goins in like 12 Monkeys, where he's
Okay,
just
yes,
going
yes, yes, yes,
completely
yes,
crazy.
yes.
And yeah, he is a fantastic leading man figure, but like something like Inglorious Bastards, or
Oh
he's
my
just like
gosh. And
hilarious.
the bullet train one, I can't remember the name
Bullet
of that.
Train, it was
Is that what
it's
it's called?
literally
Yeah,
Bullet
yeah.
Train.
Oh my God. Like he just surprises me all the time. And I like how
Mm.
he picks his roles. I think Matthew McConaughey I'd put in that category as well. Someone who surprises me, like really pushes themselves as an actor to defy what could otherwise be really easy for them. And I have a lot of respect for people who do that.
Yeah, the like even throwing in like a George Clooney when he's
Yes,
acting weird and offbeat, like in all the Coen Brothers movies he's been in. That's
totally.
my
Burn
favorite
After
because
Reading. Oh God, it's so good.
he has the most amazing paranoid face and
Yes.
demeanor ever. Like that moment where he's like, "Who are you?" And she's like, "I'm just Linda Litsky," and he's just like, just eyes, just the
I
whole
love
entire
that movie.
performance.
I love that.
Absolutely so much fun. That was actually the first film I saw in film club in college.
No
That was
kidding.
like
Really good
the
one.
first film they showed. And I'm just like, I think that was the moment where I'm just like, I really like this. Who made this? And
Amazing.
then I had a friend across the hall, and he's like, "Have you watched The Big Lebowski?" And I'm like,
Uh,
"I've never heard of it."
oh my
And
God. No wonder that was your awakening.
I immediately went out to Walmart and bought it, and then we watched
Uh,
it together.
oh my gosh. Those are back to back, those two films. Yeah, no wonder. That tells me a lot
Mhm.
about your coming of age here, your
There you
blossoming.
go. Now, Soraya, what's a film that you feel like you can watch literally like every day?
Probably Little Miss Sunshine. I love that
Nice.
movie. And gosh, it's just so dang good. You know,
Mhm.
every note works for me. And another indie Cinderella story. I have a sweet spot for those. But I think Little Miss Sunshine I could watch every day.
That whole entire cast is absolutely perfect. And just Alan Arkin being be grandpa who's teaching her how to dance.
Oh my
And
God,
God,
it's
when they
ridiculous.
finally do the performance and you're just like, this
Yes,
is what
yes,
that she was doing.
it's
Uh
amazing. And I've
and
watched that film with a lot of people that I don't think would like weird times in life where people are going through all sorts of things, and it never fails to crack a smile or make someone
yeah,
laugh. And I find there's something like healing in that story for people to watch because it's just the full spectrum of human insanity and everything is in there. And I love it. And every actor is so well cast. And what I said earlier about Frances McDormand and Brad Pitt, I apply to every actor in that one as well.
yes.
Amazing, amazing group of characters.
Super freak. Super
Yes.
freaky, yeah.
What about you? What's yours?
Oh, this is actually very topical because I could literally watch Shrek or Shrek 2, literally like pop that
I've
in,
seen that
and
movie a
I could
lot.
probably recite them from start to finish. Boom, boom. That is he get Shane to be happy. Like if
Yeah.
I need cheering up, I will throw on Shrek and
Oh, that's
quote
awesome.
that in impressions the whole
Yeah,
entire movie.
that's
I
really
felt
great.
bad because we watched it for like I do a monthly movie marathon with my friends, and I felt so bad because my friend Joe and I are just sitting there quoting this back and forth with my wife right in between us, and she's just
I've
like,
definitely done that.
"Yeah."
It's
So
pretty
I'm
good
ready
though.
for Shrek 5.
Nice.
I am
Hey,
ready.
yeah.
I
You should get like a free VIP everything for that. There needs to be a contest.
well, I would love that DreamWorks, if you're listening. Now, what's a film that you feel like you connect with because it relates to another interest of yours?
So I thought this was an interesting question, and I could probably answer this differently any
Hmm.
day, but for now I'll go with Point Break
Okay.
because a weird, maybe not so weird. I am obsessed with big wave surfing. It's the thing
Okay.
I am not a big wave surfer. I will never be a big wave surfer. I am just so obsessed with the ocean when it can reach its most extreme. I was just actually yesterday, I just flew back from a village called Nazaré in Portugal, where the biggest waves in the
Hmm.
world are. And I was living there for a while. And I went on a jet ski ride in 30-foot surf and I'm still processing it. It was a really intense experience in every way. And yeah, that movie for me, is really it's so funny. I think
Yeah.
it's like all of the California cliches. It's Catherine Bigelow, who I love. Patrick Swayze. My thing is no Swayze, no Wazy. Any additional film without him is meaningless to
Yeah.
me. He can only play Bodhi. Keanu Reeves, I mean, come on. And what's not to love? And yeah, it just really taps into a random obsession for a girl from Arizona.
It I feel like that's the kind of film that like there was some mad alchemy that brought that film together and it would only
Sure.
work in that way. And it's the kind of film that obviously would be remade, and I don't know if it
Yeah.
was the best idea. Uh,
No, no, no.
that-
I'll never watch it. I mean, maybe I will, but I just, yeah, it just doesn't. It was so a product of its time too. You
it's
can.
so 90s. It's so Catherine Bigelow,
I love it.
Patrick Swayze, and like specifically that era of Keanu Reeves. And
Yes,
just being like,
yes,
oh, I'm an FBI agent, and just like having like that energy. Like, I'm not gonna say Gary Busey's in this,
yes,
but it's just like this very specific time. There's certain films that just like this worked because of like
yes, yes.
every element coming
100% the
together.
context. Yes,
Leave it
yes.
alone. Leave it
I
alone for
totally agree. But that's one for me.
now. Do you have a movie character that you feel like you connect with on a personal level?
Yes, I thought about this question for a while and I hope to come up with something more original, but I think what I kept coming back to is Chris McCandless from the movie Into the Wild, or
Okay.
originally the book, originally
Yeah.
real life. He's a real person.
Yes.
Um, but I that was a very formative story for me, and it was, I think, for a lot of people of my
Mhm.
generation and even beyond that. There's something kind of universal to his story and this person that really wants to seek some greater meaning in this experience and not be free from the material world and all of these other obligations. And for me in my teenage years, that resonated really deeply. And I just I mean, along the lines with meeting Angela, I think there's a theme
Yes.
there of me being really, I admire that in people who go for it despite how dangerous it can be, how losing your life is a likely possibility on the other side. And maybe it's also my obsession with big waves and big wave surfers. I don't fully feel like I'm that person, but there's something in it that I identify with and really admire in a sense. So,
Well, and his story is um it's certainly something that obviously goes to an extreme for
mm-hmm,
sure.
mm-hmm,
But there's something in that drive that he had and what he was trying to accomplish that I feel like there's a little bit of that in every human being.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And like that was a film that like because I'll admit I am not that kind of person. Like I'm not somebody to just like I am particularly risk adverse and stuff like that. But like when you find the right film, like even that can like strike this as like, oh, this
Yeah,
makes me want to like go out and do something. And like
yeah,
that certainly is a film that I actually received that as a gift in college.
really.
And I had never really thought much about it or anything, and I watched it, and it was something very different for me, who, I spent most of my time sitting at home all through like middle school and high school, playing video games or reading or watching movies, and just like I'm not that kind of person that would just go off onto the grid and explore that way. But I think it hits that specific little piece of you that is just like maybe one day like I'll push myself
Mm-hmm.
to, wander and
Yeah,
do something spontaneous. I'm
sure,
also
sure.
like the least spontaneous person that I know.
But I
So
think it's okay if you're not that person. And I feel like I've noticed this a lot with the row of life reactions that it's something that I think what it comes down to is someone finding their own truth and their
yes.
own authenticity. And if your own truth and your own authenticity is not to go live in the woods of Alaska and eat berries, and kill a moose, that's fine. That's not for everyone. It's not for me either.
Yes.
I don't want to surf big waves, but there's something about the pursuit of it that I am, you know, attentive to and I admire. And so I think it doesn't have to be you. It's just a way of acknowledging that someone else is on their own hyper specific, hyper unique path. And there's something so beautiful to that like pursuit of authenticity.
Well, and I think that's where a great film, a great story, a great character, a great idea can really strike people in a universal way like that.
Mm,
And
mhm,
like I work at a college.
yeah,
I engage with so many young people who are at, the bypass in life of this is the end of your childhood and where are you going to go after this?
yeah,
And
yeah,
the biggest thing that I tell my students that I work with, whether I supervise them or tutor them or teach them, it's just like, don't say no to opportunities. You
yeah,
never know um where that opportunity can lead you. And I can pinpoint like five, six, seven specific moments in my life where I'm like, here was an opportunity, and I said yes to it. And where it took me was completely unexpected.
mhm,
And like, I have a master's in accounting. I wound up falling in love with what I did as a student worker, and somebody left in our department. I was just sitting there, I'm like, what's the worst they can do? Say
mhm,
no.
mhm,
And like
mhm.
I applied, I was 24 years old and honestly came cheap, and got hired. And now I run the department that I worked
Wow,
in when I was a student. I've been there, this is 9 years,
wow,
working there full time. And I was just telling this story to somebody. The first time I ever taught was because somebody quit 2.5 weeks into the semester and they
wow.
were desperate trying to find somebody. I'm like, I'll do
Right.
it. And those kinds of things and being able to really take
Yeah.
life when it's
Yeah.
there is a very interesting kind of thing.
Exactly. And that is the formula specific to you. That is your
Mhm.
path, each piece, because it's only in retrospect. We're like, oh my God, that's how it lined up. That's so
Yep.
crazy. It was so obscure and ambiguous at the time when you're making, same with when Angela messaged me on Facebook, like same when I agreed to do the sailing program. I didn't know what was gonna be the
Yeah,
consequence of every action. And it's extraordinary. It's a really, really special thing. And that's why I'm like not a really competitive person fundamentally, because I don't really believe in competition. I think we are all so on our own tracks. And the best thing you can do is just cheer someone on and hope they get there as smoothly, safely as possible.
absolutely. Now, what's a film that you love that you feel like would surprise people?
I actually owe Angela for this one.
Okay.
I asked her, "What's your favorite film?" And she goes, or asked her for references to of styles of other films
Yeah.
that she, and she goes, "Oh, G.I. Jane. I could watch that movie every day. Demi Moore, sexy as can be." And I was like, G.I. Jane, and I had never heard of it. And I Google it, and it's a Ridley Scott, like God knows what. And I'm like, oh my God, Angela. And then I went home and watched it that evening, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I was so not expecting it to be as intelligent of a story as it really was. I really saw, I think a lot of it is I'm sure there's some feminist out there that will, tell me what's wrong with it, and I can see it. But I think it's part of that canon of Hollywood cinema that's just meant to be such pure entertainment
Yeah.
and edge of your seat stuff. And I think Demi Moore does a fantastic job in that role. I'm really glad she's getting the acknowledgement she really deserves for her
Yeah.
career. Lately, I've always seen her as an extraordinary actress. Viggo Mortensen, incredible.
Yep.
And it so surprised me how much better of a film it was than what we were talking about expectations versus
Yeah.
delivery. And it's one of the few that I watched pretty much immediately after seeing it. Like the next day, I put it on again. And in fact, fun fact for those who are going to finally watch Row of Life, the haircut scene is a direct inspiration from G.I. Jane. So I gave Angela her wish. We implemented some of the tropes. And then the other film that I would put in this category that always surprises people is The Village by M. Night
Yeah.
Shyamalan. I watched that in college for it wasn't a film class, it was a different class. And it was kind of one of those ones where me, as the pretentious film student, I rolled my eyes that we were watching this. And then I loved it. I thought it
Yeah.
was so well done. I thought the love story was extremely powerful. Joaquin Phoenix, Bryce Dallas Howard. Oh, what's his name? William Hurt as well,
Yeah.
who apparently is very problematic. I learned about that recently. Um,
I
and
I have
yeah.
some thoughts about that specifically because
Oh, do
um
you?
Well, because I watched Children of a Lesser God for the first time
Yes.
recently,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
I have a few very close like movie friends, and
Yeah.
my buddy Griff is such a great gift giver. You go, Griff. If you're watching this interview, and he bought me this book that's basically like I think like 50 Oscar winners talking about the night and the experience
Yeah. Yeah.
and reading about her win and how he reacted because they were a couple at the time was disgusting. And I'm just like,
No, it was really bad. I saw her documentary at Sundance. I'm blanking on her name right now. Marlee Matlin. Marlee
Matlin,
Matlin.
yeah,
The documentary is excellent. That was one of the better ones
mm,
I saw at Sundance this year. Also, my friend Sarah Newens, who was a consulting editor on Row of Life, is the lead editor on that one. So it's small
nice.
world. It's really good. And yeah, she shared, I mean, she was in an abusive relationship, and this is supposed to
Yeah.
be the highest accomplishment of her career. And it was a really dark moment. And they do a really good job describing that in the film. So it always sucks when you learn these stories of people's misbehavior on the other side of art that you love. And
Yeah.
then because can you ever separate the art from the artist? No, is my answer. Look at Woody Allen, look at, how Harvey Weinstein, it's just
Yeah.
very hard to look at something knowing the ethics behind the scenes a lot of the time. But
Well,
yeah,
and
yeah,
well, and like the unfortunate thing of realizing like William Hurt played a lot of characters like that. And I'm just like, he was probably very good at it because it kind of was there's
yeah,
a
not
lot of truth
off
in those performances, it looks like, whether
totally.
it's like broadcast news
Yeah.
or Children of Lesser God and stuff like that. But no, I something in terms of like G.I. Jane, first off, Ridley Scott had very interesting 90s.
Yeah.
Trying to find like his feminist bone. Making like Thelma and Louise and like G.I. Jane and
Yes.
stuff like
Yes.
that.
That's crazy that he made Thelma and Louise too. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember finding that out for the first time, like the well, I guess he was obviously younger than that was 30 years
Sure.
ago. But like the cranky old guy that like is
Yeah.
super entertaining on all of his press junkets because he just has no F's to
No
give
filter.
anymore.
No
You know?
filter. Yeah. He was
Um,
Donald before he was Trump.
yeah. And I felt very connected with M. Night Shyamalan in terms
Mhm.
of I dating here. I remember having those mail-in DVD clubs when DVDs first became a thing. And one of my first movies they sent me was Signs. And being a
That's
12-year-old watching
crazy.
that for the first time was terrifying.
I
And that
watched it
movie
the first time a couple
still
months ago. Yes.
terrifies me.
Yes, it is. It is. It is. I was like, and my boyfriend was like, "Are you serious?"
Few points in that movie that are downright terrifying. But I just
Yeah.
remember the whole because like anytime a Shyamalan film comes out, there's so much discourse around it. And I remember The Village coming out and people being
Really.
so mad because of the twist in it.
Yeah.
And I remember watching it for the first time. I'm like, why are people so
I
angry?
know.
Like,
What is up in arms?
I think it's expectations. They're
Hmm.
promised a monster movie.
Sure, sure,
Those
sure.
trailers really
And then
sold
they have
that as a
kids.
monster movie
It's
too.
true. It's true.
But and
Good red
obviously his
herring.
career has gone into some very interesting places in
Have
terms
you
of
seen
his
the
films.
latest one? What's it called? The serial killer one?
Trap.
Oh, what happened? What
I
happened
feel
there?
like I was maybe cued in for like the first act of it, and then that movie completely went in this direction where I'm just like, why is it still going? Honestly,
Exactly. Exactly.
like, and that's the thing. It's so hit or miss with him. Like, you could go in and see something like Split that really surprised everybody. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, he still has it
Yeah.
somewhere in there. And then you see Glass, and then you're furious
Right.
at the
Right.
end of the
Yeah,
movie.
and I mean, power to an artist that does it again anyway, doesn't stop because criticism. I think that's so inherent to this
Oh,
job in this field, and it's crazy how perpetually vulnerable you have to be to put yourself out there. And I think it's such an this industry is so weird too, like what the director or the writer wants to accomplish versus what manifests because of other interests and the bigger
yeah.
budgets and every studios and so many notes from executives. And so I don't know why it came out the way it did, but it sucks when it's not great. And I just say chapeau to people who just move on and try again and make the next one because
Like,
what else,
honestly,
you know?
I feel like anytime I watch one of his films, except for maybe like After Earth or The
Yeah.
Last Airbender, like those two aside, I feel like every single one of his films feel like nobody gave him notes, nobody talked to him. This was him,
Yes. Yes. Why
and
not?
and sometimes it's great, sometimes I'm just like, oh,
Yeah.
but it's him. And I think there's very few filmmakers like that get to do that, and I can appreciate it for sure. And that's
Totally.
why I'm there opening weekend anytime one of his movies comes out, and I could be going out afterwards being like, wow, that was something special, or like,
Yeah, exactly.
wow.
You know, there's
The,
always going to be it's worthy. It's worthy of your time, I think, at
yeah.
least. You'll walk away with something, and that's more than you can say about a lot of things. So,
Mhm.
agree.
Now, my last question for you, Soraya, is what do you love most about movies?
I think what I love most about movies is, first of all, the escapism, which
Hmm.
goes back to what purpose they served for me when I was growing up. I think movies are very expansive. I think if you are someone who hasn't been able to travel a lot or experience, a wide gamut of the world, I think movies are this absolutely unbelievable tool to go anywhere, like books, but
Yeah.
film is different. And I also think they are truly empathy machines. Movies, wow, how much it can shape a human soul. I have two cousins who are about 10 years younger than me, and they left for college a year ago, and I gave them a list of like the 50 movies you have to watch this summer that I think will,
Nice.
prepare you for this next chapter. And it's just amazing to be able to, it's a catalyst. You go through, an hour and a half, 2 hour experience, and you come out with such a deeper connection to your own self, your emotional spectrum, everything. And so, yeah, expansion, empathy, escapism.
Awesome. And you're that great family member that gives out the movie recommendations.
Oh,
Love to
yeah.
love to hear that.
I heard a
But
story that Johnny Cash did that with his daughter, like the 100 country songs she had to know. And I was like,
interesting.
oh, I'm gonna do that. The 100 movies you have to know, according to me.
There you go. And I'm sure it's an awesome list for sure. Now, how I always like to wrap up my show is have my guests ask me a question, but you do have a wild card that I want you to actually say before have you ask me a question. So, what was your wild card that you wanted to bring up?
So, I have always watched movies with subtitles, and this is an
Mm,
unpopular, controversial thing that I didn't know was going to be such a controversy for the rest of my life. My boyfriend is not very happy about it, but my mom is deaf in one ear, and she also English is her second language. So
yeah.
growing up, subtitles were just always on, and that having that baked in, the text and the image is so a part of the experience to me. And I think a lot of people don't like it because they find it distracting or it gives something away before you're seeing it. I don't have that problem, and I much prefer it. I think I actually walk away from the film with a deeper understanding of exactly what word was said. I'm a writer as well, and so
Yeah.
diction is really important for me. Um, but I think subtitles are their own art. And actually, Row of Life, there is a very important scene where we rely pretty much exclusively on subtitles. And that was a really sensitive thing to figure out the timing of literally each word, each
Yes.
punctuation, because of how that was going to deliver information. So I think they can be really important storytelling tools.
Well, and I don't know if this is a consistent pattern, but the millennials I know love closed captioning. Uh, we're just like my wife's definitely somebody who's like will prefer to have it on the screen while watching. I'm like, I know some people who's like because some movie theaters have closed captioning
Yeah.
screenings where it's like they have even if it's like in English, it
Sure.
has it on the screen. I'm like, I don't care. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
especially like if you're watching something with other people, it really
right.
helps too.
Yeah.
Being able to keep track of that. But like, I don't know. People have a lot of feelings about those. And, I'll always just go back to, and even if it's in another language, obviously the
Yeah.
big thing subtitles are so important, but going back to Bong Joon-ho, it's like
Right.
there's this barrier that
Yes,
blocks people from
totally.
so many great films and stuff like that.
Totally. For comedy, we screened the film last week. Well, it's still going, but in Germany. And because people are so fixated on the subtitles than the translations in German, so much is lost in the translation of the comedic beats and the tone of
Yeah,
voice. And, there's like really funny moments in the film, and they're just, it's just, what can you do?
what
That's
can you do?
that's the way it's gonna be. So
But Soraya, what would you like to ask the Wasteland
I'm
movie?
curious. So I love that you and your wife are such partners in crime and
Mhm.
cinephiles. And what was the last time you guys had like a heated debate or dispute around something you watched that you walked away with two different opinions? I'm curious.
So it's funny because generally I have a lot stronger thoughts after watching a movie than she does, but I can think of one specific movie that we have very different feelings on, and it's oddly Zootopia because like
I love
she
it.
she very strongly feels like it's an oversimplification of race relations and stuff like that, and it's problematic. And I'm like, I get it. If you think about it too much, then it's like there's some pieces there that aren't the best, but like this one is technically for kids. So
Yes.
like it is going to be overly simplified, but I just really love Zootopia. I
Yeah.
really enjoy that movie a lot.
Oh my,
Um
so
I don't know
funny.
how I feel like we'll have to see how Zootopia 2 turns out later
Sure,
this year.
sure. This is
But
divine.
that's one that like we do not see eye to eye on
So
that movie
funny.
in terms of that. Um, she could also, in general, I think she's probably a lot more critical of things than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like obviously, I do this, I review films and I watch so many movies, and there's certain things like we all have our biases. Like I'm an action snob, so
Sure.
like if
Yes,
there's not
yes.
like
No, you mean.
well shot action in something,
Yeah,
I notice. And
totally.
I have a lot of feelings about it.
Yeah.
Um, I blame my mom for raising me on action movies. And now I'm like, I really need to like
I think
have a
that's
really good
totally
action
true.
movie.
Yeah, I take a high horse approach when I watch a documentary, and it's like my opinion is more right because
It's
I
just
know.
like,
And
mm.
yeah, that's definitely a fallacy I fall into.
But in general, it's like I want to be honest and like not every film's going to be for everybody. And I think it's
Mm,
important to express, like, hey, this is how this film plays out and how it speaks its message and stuff like that. And maybe that doesn't click for me, but I know people that would enjoy this movie. And if that's like you're that kind of person, it's like, check it out. And,
totally.
and, like there's certain movies like my wife, I distinctly remember this. So this was back in 2015, and it was back-to-back weeks beginning of like summer movie season, like blockbuster season. One of my favorite films of all time is Mad Max Fury Road. Case in
Mm,
point, action movies. It
And
is the most
Western elements there. Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
um and it's the most impeccably directed action movie ever.
Oh, I'm glad
and
to. Nice.
and the week before Avengers Age of Ultron came out, and I saw it with a group of people, and my wife hated it, hated it. And she talked about it in the parking lot. You know, you love having like go to a group movie with a group of people and you just have that conversation in the parking lot afterward. She would not let it go. And what really bothered me was the next week, I wanted to come out of Fury Road and just be like, oh my God. And all she wanted to like, see? And that's how bad Age of Ultron was. Like, talk about that right now. But like that definitely was one where it's just like I enjoyed Age of Ultron enough, but like my wife hated it,
I know
and
it's amazing.
I don't think she's watched it in the 10 years since that's come out.
I
But
mean, yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think now what the last one my partner and I have had a dispute on, but I can't. I know there has been. For the most part, we're on the same page. We watched, I think it's called A Simple Man, and
yeah,
that one is a tough film. That's very, very cerebral, and he liked it more than I did. And I think he that just fits he's
Mm.
very he also reads like Proust and all these other things I'm not totally interested in all the time. So
Well, and
it's funny
oh,
where
and
you
then and what like a particular filmmaker my wife and I don't see eye to eye on is Christopher Nolan.
Oh, interesting. Who she doesn't like him or you
No.
don't like? Oh, wow.
I am somebody that like I can get lost in the technical aspects of a film and just get engrossed in like the scale and all of this. And she's very much like it feels so film bro-y
Oh
just
my
watching.
gosh. That's so
so
funny. Wow. I don't
so
know that
I'm
you could say that about Nolan, film bro-y, but
and
interesting. She's
she
entitled to
doesn't
her.
exactly. And honestly, he's one of my favorite filmmakers. And the only film that I've watched of his that I legitimately had some very strong feelings about, in a particular negative way was probably Tenant.
Okay.
Because I did not need him to tell me to not just don't think about it. Just just go along with it. 'Cause it's literally in the script. I'm like, you don't need to tell me these things. Like I can get it.
What's the
Like
one with the magicians?
the prestige.
Okay, I have a quick story about the Prestige. So,
Okay.
film school, USC, smartest,
Mhm.
best everything. People are amazing there. And my little crew of like guys, we were in the Christopher
Yeah.
Nolan binge session, and they all agreed. I asked them what their favorite, not just Christopher Nolan movie outright was, and at least five or six of them said The Prestige. And I'm like, wow, I haven't seen it yet. I really need to go watch it. I couldn't even make it halfway through. I thought they were completely trolling me. I was like, this is a fucking joke. And I didn't finish it. And I text them, I'm like, ha ha, this is very funny. What and they're like,
And
what
they
are you
were all
talking?
very hurt.
They were so
Probably.
hurt. They were dead serious. They're like, that is a masterpiece. So I try again. Three times I've tried to watch that movie and I can't finish it. And I don't, it just does not click for me at all. I find it painfully cheesy, painfully. And I mean, people will fight to the death that that's Nolan's best movie, and it absolutely goes over my head. I am not there.
Well, I will say it is my second favorite Christopher Nolan movie
I don't
behind
know. I don't know what
Interstellar.
I'm not getting.
I remember I bought that for like I would Ryder where I work is 10 minutes down the road from Princeton. And the
Uh-huh.
Princeton Record Exchange, which is the biggest record store on the whole entire East Coast,
Oh
is
wow.
in Princeton. And they sell used movies. And I remember getting the Prestige for like $5 and
Uh-huh.
watching that with my brother during college when he was visiting and just blew my mind.
I think
Like by the
it's
time I got to the end, I'm just like, what? It's it is 100% like that puzzle box idea of
I
his.
guess so. Yeah.
And it's one of those kinds of films where it's like if you're not if you're not in it, this is gonna come off very pretentious and just like
Yes.
even like from the beginning where he's just like and then the trick is like
Uh,
guess what? That's what he's doing to you. Um during the
maybe,
whole
yeah,
entire movie and
maybe I
stuff
can give
like
it
that.
one more go, but I think we need to hook up men and women to nodes and study how our brains respond differently because that one has been very divisive as well. And
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just it's so interesting how that happens sometimes. And yeah.
Well, and just thinking about like the characters in the film, it's not exactly like they treat all the women in the movie in the best
Sure.
way,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be
yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
And
Maybe I was in a self-righteous time in my life.
well, because it's like basic like two out of three of them have unfortunate tragic fates because of
Yes.
men in their lives. And you're just like
They're very disposable in that movie.
and I'm just like, a man definitely wrote this. Particularly two brothers wrote this
Yes, yes. I wonder when
kind of
Christopher
thing.
Nolan's wife came in the picture. Do you know what the first movie is that they worked?
I do not.
I'm
Which that's very
curious.
interesting. Like they work so closely
Oh,
together.
yes, yes. And he doesn't have a phone or an email or anything. And when I learned that, I'm like, "Pff, count me out. That is
Yeah.
not the level of producer wife I need to be in a man's life.
Well,
But
and
um,
he is like that enigma kind
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
filmmaker. And obviously you have actors like Matt Damon who's just like, I'm taking a break. except if Chris calls. And then, of course, he keeps calling. So I don't think
Right,
Matt
right,
Damon
right,
ever took
right.
that break
I
because
know.
he went straight into Oppenheimer and now starring in the Odyssey, which
Yes. I'm very
I will be
excited
there.
about that one. Yeah, me too. Me too.
I'll be there immediately to
Oppenheimer
see.
wasn't my favorite. It was very,
Mhm.
very good. But for me, Killers of the Flower Moon was really the masterpiece of, was it last year or the year before? Where are we now? I don't
That
know.
well, I guess technically it was 2023, so like last year's
Right. The
Oscars.
Oscars of
Yeah.
2024. Yeah. I don't know. It was very long. The fact that it won Best Editing was very perplexing to me. Like I was, but I think that's it. Just totally comes down to taste. It's so stylistic. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not the way I make things, not the way I tell stories. And so
Well,
you learn a lot about yourself.
it's so interesting because I've learned so much listening to my favorite podcast is The Cinephiles. And
Uh-huh.
I've religiously been a fan of that podcast for years at this point. And they're like 400 something episodes in.
Crazy.
And just listening to I learned of John Roca from like the Schmodown and like Trivia Schmodown, stuff like that. So like I wandered upon this podcast that he was on, and Steve Morris, his partner on this podcast, is a film professor at UCLA.
Huh?
And like he's made documentaries about like sharks and he's made films and stuff like that. And it's so interesting listening to him speak because like he's a director and
Yeah.
he's like, I have particular ways how I would make a movie. And just like there's certain things like when I do that, no, and that's probably why I'm not Stanley Kubrick. Uh, like
Yes,
because like
exactly. Or David Lynch. Yeah.
yes,
Yes, yes.
there's and they were literally
A
just talking about
flavor.
David
Yeah.
Lynch,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
just like I would never be able to make a movie like that.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
There's certain films that I watch and I'm just like I don't even know how I would conceive
Right.
that.
Which is this is auteur theory, what you're talking about, because it's
Yeah.
the specific DNA that only that creator, injects in their work. And it's so, then you can always point, oh yes, a Lynch film. Oh yes, a Kubrick film. Oh yes. And all, like that's an amazing place. I think we all crave a part of that as creators and artists, that there will be something so identifiable to our work that's particular to us, which again goes back to that earlier conversation about what is your authenticity, right? What is it about you specifically that you can do that no one else can? And that's
Absolutely.
the pursuit, I think.
But well, Soraya, thank you so much for taking the
Jane, I
time
could
and
talk to you forever.
well, and I appreciate you going along on this journey and getting a chance
Thank
to
you.
talk about Row of Life. So please, people, pay attention to if it's coming to a festival that you might be checking out or when it's going to be available to you. But thank you so much for
Thank you
also,
very much.
opening up and talk about movies with me.
Oh, I love it. Could do it anytime, any day. Thank you.
And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.